I'm Allison Cruz here in Amelia County in Jetersville, and I'm for the soil.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Ishee, and this is For the Soil, a Conversation. We have a very intriguing guest for you today. He knows a lot about soil health, and he'll be sharing a lot of that information. We'll get to that special guest in just a few moments, but before we do that, I would like to remind everyone there's a wealth of information at our website, forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. You'll find our blog. You'll find the 4 core principles of soil health. You'll also find a place to take a pledge to improve your own soil health. Just a lot of information at forthesoil.org. Well, let's now go to this episode with Eric Bendfeldt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, myself, and our special guest. Eric, we're recording this today at Blue Ridge Community College in Augusta County. It is the Winter Forage Conference for the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council. We have a very special guest with us today. Introduce our guest, if you would.
Yes, we're pleased to have Dr. Alan Franzluebbers with us from U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service in Greensboro. And Dr. Franzluebbers done significant research on soil health and nutrient management in Virginia and across the Southeast and across the country. And it's been specifically focusing on the importance of rotations in forage and livestock in a system. So we're very pleased to have Alan with us.
Dr. Franzluebbers, it's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast today, For the Soil, a Conversation. And I think one thing that our listeners would want to know is a little bit more about your background. How do you work specifically with soil health?
Okay, well, the background is that I played in the dirt when I was young, and that I got an interest in microorganisms when I was working at the university as a technician. And it just kind of developed. The fascination of soil is tremendous. I mean, that soils cycle nutrients, decompose plant material or manures, and then it releases nutrients to the plant. So I've always been interested in nutrient cycling and carbon sequestration in the soil.
You had a very interesting presentation today during the Winter Forage Conference, and there were a couple of things that really got my attention. I think they got the attention of the farmers and the graziers in the room. One thing you talked about was the microorganisms in the soil. And you says farmers can't see them. They see the results of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you don't really see microorganisms because they're so small that you can't see them with the naked eye. You need a microscope to see the individual cells. Sometimes we can see the bodies of them in that they produce multiple cells of a mushroom. You see the fungi through a mushroom that then emerges from the ground. You can also see fungi through the mat that might form under a canopy of forage, and that forms on the wet soil surface. And so sometimes we can see them, but that's the community of organisms that we don't see the individual cells.
What about those organisms that farmers can see? And I know farmers a generation ago, they would go out and do earthworm counts, digging a cubic foot of soil and measuring the number of earthworms. How important are earthworms?
Well, they don't have to be in the soil, but when they are in the soil, they create large channels for water to penetrate and infiltrate into the soil. So earthworms, the fact that they are there means that there are resources there for them to live. When there are no resources for them to live, such as in a tilled field with very little crop residue on the surface, they won't be there. And of course, that physical action also means that they won't be there because they're being disturbed. When there are resources available, when organic matter is at the surface, where there's surface litter, that's when they will be there.
Eric Bendfeldt with Virginia Cooperative Extension. What was your takeaway message from Dr. Franzluebbers?
Well, during the presentation, just seeing the importance of diversity and not depending just simply on one crop. And I know here in Virginia that thinking about soil health principles, we talk about energizing with diversity. And I know Dr. Franzluebbers talked about that. If he could just speak a little bit more about how important that is to the system.
Yeah, the diversity can be really important. You can have diversity of plants. In a pasture system, we often think about the diversity in the pasture itself. So whether there are forbs, ironweed, or grasses that are there, or trees that are in there, those provide different rooting structures so that water can penetrate, that beetles can be moving around, that other insects are around. So all that diversity helps in the structure of the soil over time. The diversity can also be, in agriculture, historically, diversity was that one might have a corn crop that one wants to plant, and then you follow that with a small grain crop. And then you might plant in some red clover with that or establish some alfalfa. And that it would be then there for a number of years. And those crops over time create that diversity, which then foster insect populations that can help prevent pathogens from spreading, and then that microorganisms develop, that the soil organic matter develops appropriately in the soil, so that there's an increase of that organic matter.
You also talked about carbon in the soil and how important it is that we increase the carbon in the soil. Let's take, for instance, a specific example. On the south side of Virginia, maybe a cotton grower. 150-acre field of nothing but cotton, continuous cotton. And that soil is slowly being depleted. How can they improve the health of their soil and add carbon?
Yeah, good question. Of course, it depends on what they want to achieve from their operation. If they're interested in the cotton crop as the main crop, then of course they can simply add a cover crop. They can plant that cover crop after the cotton is harvested, but oftentimes that's late in the year. Then establishment is limited, so they could fly it on also or broadcast it with an operation. So the cover crop would be one way to diversify and increase organic matter. It's also possible then to maybe grow a hay crop, avoid the cotton. You can also, of course, diversify with other, say, grain crops or small grains. And that could be beneficial because the changing of the operation means that you can then limit herbicide applications so that we're controlling weeds with the diversity of growing conditions during the year.
And one of your slides also is you've had both cattle, pasture-raised, poultry, but then also there was a slide that you shared about agroforestry and silvopasture systems. I know that's becoming more of an interest in the southeast of the U.S. as well as across the world. Just how can you manage livestock as well as the different components of an agroforestry system where it's a combination of agriculture and trees as well as livestock?
Yeah, that's good point and a good subject. We don't necessarily know all that we need to know about the situation. But when you find one tree in a pasture, you know where the animals are going to be in the heat of the day, don't you? And the fact is that when you have those cattle have access to that pasture year round, they will denude that area under the tree. And then you might say, well, having that tree maybe isn't necessarily good for the landscape. But if you had multiple trees in the pasture, then you could start rotating them around or fencing them off. Temporary fencing is one strategy, one tool to use so that you can better manage that pasture. And so you do need to implement a few more tools when you have a silvopasture situation.
We're talking with Dr. Franzluebber, Alan Franzluebber with the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, also NC State University, I believe. Let's now downsize just a little bit from that 150-acre cotton field to a backyard vegetable garden. Brand new gardener has raised beds. They want to have healthy soil. What's the first thing they should do?
Well, absolutely. I know this well because I have a small garden myself, and you don't have to have fertilizers in a small garden. There's just no need for fertilizers because you can import your leaf litter from the yard. You can have the zinnias that you grow, compost them, or even just use them as residues. That decomposition of plant material is your fertility. And so utilizing that on your own property, you don't necessarily have to import from another property. Use it on your own property. That's the biggest thing. If in fact you clip your grass, your lawn, then use that as a fertility. It's an excellent source of organic material that will provide nutrients for the garden.
Also, on your journey with talking about and educating people about soil health, who inspired you in the process? And then also, I'm sure our listeners would be interested if you'd have a resource that you would share with them on the topic of caring for the soil.
Great question. I suppose I should have thought about this a little bit before, but there is one scientist that inspired me the most, and his name is John Duran. He was also a USDA scientist. He was in Lincoln, Nebraska. I grew up in Nebraska, so I got to know him because I went to school there. He inspired me a lot because he had this whole system view of agriculture, and he inspired me. But I would say that I also want to say that my ancestors inspired me because, of course, it was a different time. My grandfather in specific, using long rotations, caring for the soil, making sure that erosion didn't occur.
One final question, Dr. Franzluebbers, and that's about the future of agriculture. We see a lot of research and we see a lot of interest in urban agriculture and in hydroponics or soilless food production. Where do you foresee this going, and can we live as a society without soil?
Well, no, we cannot live without soil, but I would say that hydroponics are perfectly fine. If some people want to try it, no problem. I don't think we should poo-poo anything. We should let the diversity of our operations be the norm. But we need to take care of our soil, because if we let our soils degrade and be lost through erosion, then we are at a lower position. We are losing our fertility of our land, our ability to care for ourselves. So absolutely, we need to have soil. It doesn't only provide resources for agriculture, it provides it for the general public for water quality, for atmospheric regulation.
Eric, just a couple of minutes remaining in this podcast episode. Do you have any further questions for Dr. Franzluebbers?
One would be like a resource or a book that you might share. I know for myself, I was often inspired by Timothy Egan's The Worst Hard Times, that chronicles people's lives during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. I'm not sure if you would have one that you would share.
I don't know that I know enough books. My focus is on conducting research, so I don't really get a whole lot of time to read books. But I would say that Cover Crops for Profitability is a good place to start about learning about how plants can actually, different plants can contribute to soil health. And so that would be one thing to look at. Yeah, I'll leave it at there. Thanks.
Okay. And NC State University also has a lot of YouTube videos. Is there any particular on soil health that you might recommend?
To tell you the truth, I don't know that library so well, so I'll have to get informed myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Luber.
And once again, we would like to thank Dr. Franzluebbers for joining us on this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Now, as we mentioned, not only does North Carolina State have a great library of YouTube videos concerning soil health, but so does Virginia Cooperative Extension. Matter of fact, if you go to YouTube and do a search for Virginia Extension, you'll find dozens of videos concerning soil health and agricultural production. I'll just list just a few that have been published within the past couple of months. A soybean pest update, small grain pre-plant considerations, tips for starting a vegetable garden, high fertilizer prices. Why? That's a very interesting video. Also, homegrown pumpkins, Brussels sprouts. There's just a lot of information there at the YouTube page for Virginia Cooperative Extension. You might want to check that out. Well, in each episode, we do like to stress the 4 core principles of soil health, and here's Dr. Rory McGuire with Virginia Tech.
Keeping the soil covered is very important in terms of preventing soil erosion. Soil erosion is one of the biggest ways to decrease soil quality. If you lose the soil, you're losing what the valuable part of your land. So keeping the soil covered prevents soil erosion. And when raindrops directly impact the soil, they can form a crust on the soil surface. They actually break the soil structure right at the soil surface. And once the soil structure is broken at the surface, you don't get any infiltration of water anymore. And of course, if water doesn't infiltrate, it runs off. And when it runs off, it takes the soil with it. So keeping the soil covered is extremely important in terms of preventing surface crust formation and soil erosion.
Dr. Rory McGuire with Virginia Tech. For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, just visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you should have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of The Flip Charts and Mr. Ruiz. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.